I hope that everyone is doing well, and that you and your loved ones are safe and healthy, and that we all stay that way. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I can't say how much inspiration I get from this, and I know that our entire team gets from the turnout and response that you all have given. It fills us with incredible hope to know that so many people care about uAspire and care about the students who we serve and who've been deeply affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. This crisis exposes the injustices that we have been fighting against for quite a while, but it puts an even brighter light on those injustices. The economic devastation that we've already seen with so many folks, nearly 17 million folks applying for unemployment, has certainly put America's class divide on full display, but certainly has pointed to deep inequalities across racial lines, geographically, and others. Before the pandemic, 3 out of 4 college students were employed, and many of those actively seeking work to balance the cost of college. But with the skyrocketing rates of unemployment and job cutbacks that we've seen student incomes and family incomes greatly diminished. In addition to that, prior to this, 1 in 2 students faced some degree of food or housing insecurity. And now those struggles are even greater as we've seen residence halls close, dining halls close, and food pantries located on campuses no longer available to students. When students once might have benefited from parental support of some level, we now see them being called to serve and respond to their family's needs in ways that are greater than ever before. Students are working to evolve their understanding of learning, having to devote time not only to classwork, but to a set of tasks and activities that are outside of the norm for them and that require access to internet, technical hardware that they just don't have reliably, which is further complicating their ability to earn the degrees that they're aiming towards in an efficient and an affordable way. We've seen high school seniors choosing colleges or considering colleges that are less expensive and closer to home as they've entered into this pandemic. Others are thinking about reducing and going part-time or delaying enrollment so that they can be of support to their families. And a particular concern of ours is that students from low-income families who were sent home this semester may never return. And what we know, many of us on this call know, is that when students start higher education but don't finish, they face some of the most difficult and challenging outcomes of all. The final thing I'll say is that I had the privilege to sit on a Massachusetts task force on school closures last year, and one thing I can say will be unavoidable from this pandemic is that we're going to see post-secondary school closures in the near and not so distant future, which will certainly create a different landscape for students and likely reduce the options that they have, particularly low-income students have, among the choices of schools that they can take on. Amidst all of this, I can say that we are incredibly grateful that uAspire is in the position that we are to serve students. Quite frankly, our mission is as important today as it's ever been. And thanks to our investment in virtual technologies that allow us to continue to support students, which a number of you have helped us make possible with your investments. And just to name a few that have been among the most significant supporters of our our virtual advising work, the State Street Foundation, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, the Salesforce Foundation, the Edwin Gould Foundation, and the Heckscher Foundation for Children. Because of your belief in our vision for serving more students at scale, uAspire's work has been able to carry on in this period with optimism that we can continue to serve students and a real single-minded purpose for ensuring that students make it through this critical time of great uncertainty and financial challenge with as much support as we can provide. Your dedication to countering the problems of college affordability broadly and your generosity on that mission inspires us each and every day. And we truly believe, and I think the last few weeks have shown, as many of you have rallied to our side to support us with additional resources, that we simply have the best supporters, the best board of directors, and the best community partners that an organization could ever have. The last thing I'll say is that I truly love this organization, its mission, its ambition, and most importantly, the people that are connected to this organization. As a first-generation college graduate myself, it has been in my absolute life's honor to lead uAspire over these 15 years, and I feel deeply privileged to be its leader in this moment in time, to lead it through this beginning phase of uncertainty that we and our communities are facing. We're, as you'll see, and as I'll explain a little bit more deeply, we are responding to this crisis significantly. We were fortunate to be already deeply engaged in serving students virtually using our text-based advising, and we've been honing our virtual delivery model for nearly a decade, since 2012, actually. So unlike many nonprofits, we've not experienced a full disruption in our services. We're incredibly grateful for that, and we remain well connected to our students and to our partners during this time. Certainly, we've had to adapt and learn, though, and we continue to stay true to our mission and meet the pressing needs that our students have. So with all that as helpful context, I'd love to share with you a little bit about how we're rising to the challenge in the three facets of our work: our advising work, our training work, and our policy and systems change work. Starting with advising, safely from their homes, uAspire's advisors have continued to support nearly 12,000 students in Massachusetts, New York, and the San Francisco Bay Area. And as we all know, those are geographies that have been hit especially hard by the virus reaching our shores. With their schools and colleges closed, our students who already had an uphill climb in achieving their dreams face new and compounded struggles with financial insecurity, adapting to online learning, unemployment, housing security, access to healthy or any food at all. Over the last several weeks, our daily advisor and student conversations have shifted pretty significantly to cover things like securing refunds for housing or meal plans, how to secure work-study wages while students are not working, finding access to reliable Wi-Fi, computers, and printers, surprisingly, because colleges are still requiring paper forms for students and even requiring that those forms be notarized by a notary public. So as you can see, there's been a pretty significant degree of shifts that our students have had to encounter during this time. And because so many of our young people are succeeding at getting into college, on top of all that, our high school seniors are getting critical support to understand their financial aid offers from colleges and to request appeals to change their income and their income situation based on unemployment in their families related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and as well to complete the verification process. But through it all, we've been gaining incredible inspiration from our students. And one of our advisors, Maya, shared with us that even though our students are facing great struggles, they're incredibly resilient. And it's that resilience that drives us to continue to serve our students day after day. In terms of our training and partnership work, our team is working hard to meet the pressing needs of counselors and professional staff at schools and nonprofits who are helping students navigate this time. Our college affordability training continues across the country via webinar. By the end of this month, we'll have trained the California Student Opportunity and Access Program, the College Advising Corps, Michigan Works, TextCan, the University of Washington Gear Up program, and many others. By doing what we can do to support our school partners, we've also launched a financial aid help desk to support our counselors and our partner schools with the ever-changing financial aid circumstances. And we've leveraged our virtual technology and data sources to enable one of our high school districts to communicate critical information to their seniors via text. We've also shared our resources and our best practices in an open source format. And some of the examples of that have included a set of student-facing how-to videos that we've developed. We've held a free webinar for 108 high school counselors on guiding college-bound students through the summer. And we're helping our peer organizations with deploying virtual programming for their first time so that they can continue to support their students. And finally, on a policy front, because there continues to be and will be even more opportunities to improve policy and systems, our policy and knowledge teams are actively engaging with our coalitions and other national experts to assess and navigate the fast evolving higher ed affordability environment and advocate for necessary student-centered policy change. Our policy team is engaging congressional offices, providing recommendations on the stimulus bills. We've signed onto 3 coalition letters on federal and state levels for what is needed for students to navigate this crisis. And our own uAspire Student Advocacy Fellows, who are 14 college students from Massachusetts, California, and Pennsylvania, are navigating enormous challenges. As media requests for interviews come in, fellows are sharing their experiences to highlight the need for policies that ensure students can meet their basic and educational needs with any available resources. Our research report, Beyond the Bill, The Hidden Hurdles of Indirect Expenses, was completed just last month. However, we've tentatively delayed the release until June. But the issue of indirect expenses, those hidden costs of college that include textbooks and course materials, transportation, food beyond the meal plan, housing for off-campus students, and so much more, is particularly relevant at this time. Indirect expenses make up more than half the cost of college, but without clear information from colleges, students are often left in the dark until they're struggling to cover them in real time. And beginning next month, our student policy fellows will be doing outreach to federal and state legislators. Our advocacy fellows will use their personal stories as well as the report's findings and policy recommendations to advocate for system-level solutions that give students a better understanding of the costs beyond the college bill and ways to cover those costs. During this public health crisis, we're working to ensure that students are able to meet their basic needs, participate in classes, and stay on track to college or to their degree. The widespread job losses and resulting financial insecurity is causing educational disruptions that will have long-lasting consequences, not only for individuals, but also for their families and our communities across the country. Before I finish, I want to say a brief word about how uAspire is navigating all of this as an organization. For the very near term, we're fortunate to be in a financial position. We were in a financial position heading into this downturn brought by the coronavirus pandemic. We've been reaching out to many of you on this call for support, and as I said earlier, many of you have answered the call, and I'm incredibly grateful for the additional resources that you've brought, the flexibility that you've shown, and the collaboration that you've encountered and that you've encouraged. Like all organizations, we're taking every step that we can to minimize costs and have begun to contingency plan given the incredible amount of uncertainty that lies ahead. We're doing everything we can to ensure that uAspire is in a strong position to continue to serve our students because the needs that they have now will continue to persist for weeks and months and likely years to come, and we hope to be there for them as the implications of this crisis continue. At this time, I want to take a moment to introduce two of my colleagues who are going to step in and help us answer questions that you might have relative to our programming and our policy work. I'm honored to be joined by uAspire's Chief Policy Officer, Laura Kane, and our Chief Program Officer, Claire Dennison, who are going to support me in answering your questions for the rest of our time together. And with that, we'll begin the Q&A period.
Bob, we're going to start with a question from Cindy, one of our illustrious board members. What needs are emerging in the student advising work, and how can they be addressed?
I'll start, and then I'll throw it over to Claire. I think at a macro level, what we're experiencing in terms of student needs run a pretty wide range in terms of being able to meet their immediate needs as a student and as a family with food security, housing assistance, helping them, as I mentioned earlier, secure refunds for the changes to their college education that they've experienced. If they're high school students, we're helping them navigate the immediate decision-making process that they're undergoing as well, to understand how their financial situation has likely changed and what flexibility there might be from their intending college or university to either provide a more generous aid package or to think differently about what their costs may be come the fall. Claire, I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to add with that based on the robust information that we've collected from advisors over this period.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty comprehensive as to kind of the content of the messages that we've seen so far from students, you know, bucketed in exactly the categories you mentioned around just general college going, need for information and confusion around college policies and procedures, whether they're in high school or college. I also kind of just, as you mentioned in your intro, lack of ability to move through the systems that have existed for obtaining aid and what to do in those moments. I think what has been really different in the last few weeks and now month is the social emotional needs that we're seeing from our students. For many of our advisors, they were a broker of information around financial aid and affordability, and they've now become a lifeline for some of our students. I don't say that to be dramatic. I think for at least the first few weeks, we were some of the only folks outreaching in a proactive way directly to students, while a lot of our partner organizations and partner schools figured out the infrastructure they need to support. So that's been a real shift in the content that I've seen for the advisor to student conversation. And we were lucky that we were actually rolling out a mental health first aid training to our advisors right around the time of this pandemic breaking. And so we had some plans in place, but that's still an area that we're growing our expertise, and we will always be affordability focused. So this is, you know, kind of an add-on piece to our work. And I'm not sure if Cindy meant just what student needs were in our advising program, but we also have a number other needs emerging from, partners, from our own staff, infrastructure, and things like that I'm happy to get into if people are interested.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I will go to a question in the chat. Laura Lee from NCAN. What are you hearing from students about award letters? Are they still receiving them, or did they have them before everything started? And what are you hearing from college students about getting refunds? Claire, I don't know if you want to get us started on that one.
Yeah, I can kick off, and then also I will probably defer a little bit to Laura with her expertise on working on the aid offer and the aid offer cycle and working on the policy level there. It really runs the gamut. This should probably be not a lot of surprise to the partners that are on the call. You're probably experiencing similar things if you've been working with students throughout this process. We are doing our best to do due diligence and finding out where there are kind of patterns and ties that bind across institutions of higher education and where there are differences. Where I am most nervous is around aid offer letters from some of our public institutions, which are historically late anyway in passing budgets and getting those aid offers out to our students, and I can only see that probably exacerbated by this process. So it really runs the gamut. We're starting to have these conversations, the aid offer conversations with students, but there's still a lag time in kind of understanding what are the ties that bind in this particular part of the affordability process. I would also say we've gotten a lot of outreach from our partners and from students around the appeals process because of some of the things that Bob mentioned in his intro, the knowledge that students' financial situations are going to change or have already changed from what they submitted on their FAFSA. So that's a big theme too. I don't know if you'd add anything, Laura, just on the policy side for aid offers.
Sure, I could just echo a lot of the themes that you mentioned, Claire. We have seen that this bleeds back towards admissions again as well, given the timing in March. And so for those institutions that were giving offers of admission and as well then financial aid packages following later in the year. From the institutional front, we're seeing a variety of responses. Mostly there's interest for students to try to appeal, per what Claire said, and it goes into what's called professional judgment, or PJ. And the professional judgment has guidelines from the Ed Department. And those guidelines were set in 2008 during the recession. And oftentimes it requires more time to create documentation of different financial need. And of course, right now, this is so sudden that there isn't really documentation enough showing a long enough financial burden. So I think we're in a little bit of a catch-22 in that moment.
Thanks, Claire and Laura. We have a couple of related questions around supporting students and thinking about unemployment. So one, is uAspire partnering with other organizations to help students with broader social services, unemployment, and other needs? Maybe Claire, you can tackle that one. And then there's another question from Cindy, both actually from Cindy, or for Laura, really around kind of what's happening on the policy front in terms of addressing crippling student debt in a time of soaring unemployment. So Claire, if you want to speak first to how we are supporting students, and then we'll turn it over to Laura to address kind of the bigger policy issues.
Yeah, I would say kind of on the very basic level, we're approaching this similarly to how we do this in a normal year of again, kind of brokering resources of how to apply for unemployment. Obviously, it's a little bit of a larger scope and more happening on a broader level this year. But we are largely, when students come to us with questions around finding jobs or losing jobs, we are directing them to either campus resources if it's underneath the umbrella of federal work study, or we're directing them to ideas for how to apply for unemployment. So that like kind of day-to-day basic level has not shifted greatly. I think as far as partnership goes, that's a great and valid point. We are constantly adding. We have a very rich resource list for our advisors to use and pull from. And thanks to a phenomenal knowledge team and policy team, they're sourcing kind of what are the basic, blanket, accurate and up-to-date information that we want our advisors to send out to our students. We're constantly sourcing that document so advisors can pull from the latest information on a national and regional level as far as information goes. And I would say also as advisors here from school partners and on the high school level and school partners on the college level, we're adding that information as well.
Great, and I'll just add on, all of these issues that are, I would call them affordability related, do have policy and systems change implications. So of course, unemployment are benefits that come from the federal government that have integration into state level application as well. And so we are very actively, we are in more coalition meetings than ever right now, several a week, in order to support each other with our different levels of expertise. So those who are more specialized in food insecurity and they really understand SNAP and different food programs like CalWORKS in one of our states, we're working with them, joining on coalition letters, and then we're also using that frontline expertise from policy to get information back, knowing who are the right folks on the ground. Well, we might be the right folks around some financial aid aspects, who are the right folks around unemployment, et cetera. And then we're sharing that information back with our program team to get that in the hands of our advisors and students as quickly as we can. In terms of the broader policy question from Cindy, if I shift to that, just generally speaking, there's much happening both in what we call the statutory realm as well as the regulatory. And what that means is we are very active talking to members and offices of Congress as they are writing legislation, such as the CARES Act, and right now what's known as Phase 4, the upcoming legislation that is going to be the fourth phase of support from the federal government. And then we are also very active in the regulatory space, which would be through the Department of Education, and very specifically with federal student aid. And for example, we are leveraging very small, detailed frontline expertise there about FAFSA, around verification, around issues around access and barriers. So with the CARES Act, right now it is designated $30 billion to go to higher education institutions. There's a formula that is set by the law about how that money is being distributed. And there's a question about half of that money. So 50% is explicitly designated to go to students through emergency aid. The other 50% is a bit more vague. So we are actively working in coalitions to help push the department to give better guidance to help ensure that that other set of money in high proportion goes to students and also goes to the students who need it most. In terms of the focus on debt, right now, by and large, it's been very dominated by repayment relief, which has been successfully navigated. It started with a White House comment and has been supported through the CARES Act. And that repayment relief is focused on auto suspension of loan payments as well as 0% interest through September 30th. Again, there's a lot of devil in the details regarding things like public service loan forgiveness, and or what's called SAP, Student Satisfactory Academic Progress, for students to maintain eligibility. So we're getting right into the weeds with many of our other coalitions and colleagues to help read directions around guidance or laws very closely to help ensure that they're student-centered and that students aren't left behind in the details of how those laws get implemented. Also important on the debt issues is around communication with students, and folks are just starting to talk more longer term beyond September 30th in regards to help ensure that there isn't a cliff for delinquency or default for students, especially from low-income backgrounds.
Thank you, Laura. We're going to go to a question regarding COVID-19 and specific services that may be requested of us. So have we seen a significant level of inquiries or increased inquiries from states, districts, organizations that we are not currently serving, but those who are seeking our services and support in response to COVID? And Bob, I'll turn this over to you to get us started.
So I do know, and Claire can probably even put a finer level of specificity on this, but I do, and I want to thank Kathy from Kathy Fries from the AT&T Foundation for her question. We have certainly had a high degree of outreach from parts of the country that we have not engaged with as readily, and partner organizations that either we've an increased amount of outreach from current partner organizations and outreach from potential partner organizations at this time. We've really been focused on our current partnerships at this moment and making sure that in this initial shift that we've been able to serve our current students well, our current training partners, our school partners, and our 3 major metropolitan areas that may need additional support as well, and being there for them. But I myself have fielded a few examples of outreach, and I know that our training team in particular has gotten an increased level of inquiry over the last few weeks. Claire, is there anything more specific that you would say about that?
I think that covers the basics. The only layers of specificity I would add, first, I think it's the what they're contacting us for. I think historically we've been the affordability expert, and happy to be and thankful to be amongst our peer organizations and partner organizations across the country. What has shifted in the last few weeks is how many folks have turned to us around how to learn more about supporting their students virtually. We have not used text messaging as a nudging tool. We use text messages to advise our students. We advise through text, and that is something that more and more people are having to do, not just, if Zoom or other platforms like this are not available, texting is, and using Google Voice and other texting platforms are ways to connect with students. And so a lot of our partners are actually reaching out to us to say, can you give us some advice on how to even start this, how to operationalize it? What are some of the best practices? There's a number of staff on this call and outside of this call that are supporting our partners in that way. So that's another big piece of support that I feel like we're offering. And Bob mentioned this, but really supporting our current partners who may not have thought through kind of this heavy season, especially for our high school seniors that we work with, this heavy season of support and counseling needed, and reaching out to help them gather what are kind of the best go-to resources, both uAspire and external national resources that they can provide to their students. So looking to us again, kind of for both brokering and codifying all the noise and language that's out there, and simplifying it in the way that we are used to doing. So I think that those are the 2 areas of places that we've dove in deep. And then, as Bob mentioned in his intro, for some of our partners and some of our community-based organizations that we partner with, even I know John from CBI is on the line, even in New York City, finding ways to get messages to the students that are in our portal on behalf of some of our partners, like our larger school districts and our CBOs that we work with. Those are all the different ways that I think we've positioned ourselves to support and have been asked to support in the last month.
Okay, thank you, Claire. We do have a question from John, Student Leadership Network, CBI, about whether or not, and this will be for Laura in particular, whether or not we have heard anything yet on the advocacy policy front about kind of threats to HEOP and EOP programs, and if we've heard anything about any types of cuts to those funds as a result of COVID-19.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for this question. We do not have staff on the ground in New York full-time on doing New York State policy, but I really want to shout out Yasi and her team who have been very actively engaged alongside their service to students with some of the groups there. So we do have some coalition connections, et cetera. In terms of overarching across state aid programs, this is seen as a longer term question, and several of us have raised it in some coalition calls, knowing that after the 2008 recession, much higher percent of the share, as it's often called in policy circles, of the costs were put on students and families because states must balance their budgets, and so then they had to cut their higher ed budgets, and that percent got put onto students. Recently, we were just starting to edge out of that phenomenon, getting back slowly to where we were pre-2008 recession. So longer term, this is a really big concern of how it might play out. Initial conversations are focusing on advocating for federal-state partnerships with incentivization to maintain, if not ensure, that more of the cost does not go on to students and families. And I think that's where the EOP and different type of programs designed by states is really going to come into play. So it's a little too early to tell, but it is on the radar in conversations, and it's great to bring it up. I think it's important to be norming toward that already.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. We're actually going to go to another question from one of our board members, and we're actually going to ask this board member more of a statement than a question, and something really important for all of us to be thinking about in this work. So we're actually going to ask Nadine to go ahead and unmute yourself, Nadine, and jump in and kind of share the statement that you made regarding racial inequities and how that is being exacerbated by COVID-19.
Thank you, Heather. I think I'd reached out to Jermaine just a couple of days ago with some reflections, and I think my perspective, which is somewhat unique, having been served by the organization, I go back to the 80s. So when the organization was in its smaller stage as Access, which is what we knew it then, growing up in Dorchester, so attending and aspiring to go to college and being one of the first in our families to go to college. I'm speaking not just for myself, but for many of my classmates at Boston Latin and in the Roxbury, Mattapan, and Dorchester communities, that we really look to Access to help demystify how to navigate not just the college admissions process, but particularly the financial aid process, which was very new to us. Many of us are also first-generation immigrants, so our families were not very comfortable with speaking the English language to be able to decode how to make this accessible. So my sort of long and short reflection is that in the days that we live in now, to be able to have an organization that has the trust of communities, and not just in Massachusetts now, but having expanded nationally, particularly with first generation families and communities of color, that has always understood the need not to go beyond the direct services, but also to address the practices and the policies that are in place that place a burden on talented students who want what we all want for our students, which is to be able to go to college and realize their full potential. I think for me, what I've been reflecting on the past couple of weeks is that we cannot afford to not have the students of today not go on to college and graduate, because we're going to need them to be able to solve whatever the next crisis that will hit. So I think I'm encouraged, and I'm really excited to be in a position to be of service to uAspire, because I truly believe that you are doing what it will take to remove real tangible barriers for students, similar to who I was in college. And when you think about what our students are facing today, navigating distance learning and families at home where their parents may be sick, so they have to figure out and navigate taking care of family members who themselves have the virus, and then not having the infrastructure to support them academically, and then trying to figure out how do you navigate the finances of it. This has really been like a storm of a health crisis that has highlighted that the disparities for a lot of our students of color. So I wanted to sort of echo what the conversations that we are having on the national board, as well as the senior leadership team and everyone at uAspire that is deeply committed to making sure that not only do we serve the students right in front of us today, but that we solve some of these things for the future.
Thank you, Nadine, for that comment. I think it's really important to say in this moment that there is, without a doubt, this pandemic will have a disproportionate impact on our communities of color, and the response needs to take that into account. And I hope that our state and local governments, our philanthropic entities, really focus on how to ensure that there's equity in our response, and that we're driving resources and solutions to ensure that we can make as little impact on communities of color as possible as a result of this, and in fact, think about how to disproportionately invest in bringing those communities back faster. I know that uAspire, because of our equity focus and our policy work, but also in terms of the way that we're committed to this work in our practice, will be at the front line of ensuring that our young people and communities of color have a representative seat at the table to ensure that their voice gets them the resources and the solutions that they need to rebound from this as quickly as possible.
Thank you so much, Nadine, for jumping in and jumping on camera and making sure that we attended to racial equity in this conversation today. We will go to another question from one of our board members. This is from Ho, and what are some of the other nonprofits providing services to students and families? What are some other services that we know of that some other folks in this arena are providing in this crisis? And I don't know, Bob, if you want to share anything that you know. Claire and Laura can certainly then jump in as well.
Sure, I'll start. I mean, I think the first is, as many of the folks on this call know, one of our 5 organizational values is collaboration. And in this moment, that value remains critical to providing a high quality set of services to students. So our advisors and our programmatic team, our knowledge team, have been cataloging the work that's being done by other organizations to serve students' food security needs, helping with housing resources, employment. And so we've been partnering with other organizations that are better able to handle those needs for students and making sure that students have the information that they need to access any of those services as well. So I would say that at a macro level, given our organizational focus on collaboration, has been sort of the number one way that we've oriented to working with other organizations. Claire or Laura, I don't know if you want to jump in with anything in addition to that.
Yeah, I can start. Well, I think, and Ho and others, I know you all know this, just because things have been so fast moving and evolving over the last few weeks, I feel like a lot of organizations, especially the peer organizations that we're working closely with, are trying to get their handle on kind of what do we have to offer and where are we at with our own capacity and resources to support right now. So the conversations have absolutely already started with a lot of our partners about how we can coalesce together, both in thinking about fundraising together and in delivering support to students and practitioners together underneath kind of the program umbrella. But those are evolving conversations. So I think we're at a place actually programmatically where we're looking at what are the short-term implications for our programming and long-term implications for our programming, and where can we collaborate along those implications, along those pathways with specific partners, especially our school partners on the high school work side, and thinking about kind of more collective impact groups on the college side. So I would say that's something, check back in with us in a few weeks, because I will have a lot more answers. But kind of on the smallest scale, we've been working very close, not smallest scale, still very impactful, but on more of the micro level, have been working closely with other community-based organizations that serve schools and that serve the students in the districts that we're at, and working together on what their services look like, just to understand how are students being outreached to, so that we are not coming on too strong with our support, but we are actually making sure that there's not duplicative support across the organizations that are reaching out to students. So that's on the high school side, and I can certainly add more because these are active, ongoing conversations right now.
And I can chime in quickly from Policy Systems Change. Again, When I say the word coalition, what that means is like-minded groups and organizations committed to advancing educational equity in higher education. And I know on the call is Maura Lee from the National College Attainment Network. And NCAN's been a really critical group for us to be engaged with right now. I was on the phone this morning with their Director of Policy, Carrie Warwick, and it helps us integrate across understanding different state scenarios as well as how to align on some of the federal positions. And again, we're generating ideas and then we're pressure testing them. So we're generating some ideas that then we change our mind on very quickly. And instead of having every independent group be reaching out to congressional offices, there's more power in having collective letters that have been proofed a bit beforehand. And lastly, it's a really great way to leverage different layers of expertise in different domains. So it's been very critical. So groups like TICUS and NCAN, America Forward, EdTrust, the Hope Center, and others, it's really been a strengthening of how we can each leverage our expertise together, knowing we're all in it for equity for students.
Okay, thank you so much. We are going to go to a final question. It is not the final question. We have a few more in the chat, but our final question for today before we turn it over to Bob to promptly close our session. And this question is about, and Claire, you'll be the primary go-to person on this one. Are we hearing of students thinking about deferring acceptance, taking a gap year, things like that, and how are students kind of navigating the switch to working remotely, things of that nature, and how are students thinking about that in terms of what their plans are for the fall?
Yeah, it really runs there's a really wide range of responses. And I think on the high school side, absolutely this is front of mind because we're in 8 offer season, or supposed to be in 8 offer season, and decision-making time where students are making those calls. And so there is a significant shift that I've seen in our portal and that our advisors and other program team members have shared around students saying, I might need to not go to school, I might need to change my plans from one type of institution to another, or for some students, I can no longer go to my dream school because I was thinking about, because it costs a lot more money. So there's a lot of different pathways of decisions changing. This is normally the work of our Summer College Connect program. This is a lot of the counseling we do and advising we do over the summer that has actually been kind of bumped up in making sure students are able to stay on the pathway that works best for them. So that is absolutely a theme of messages that we're seeing. And on the college side, absolutely, especially with the mid-semester shift to online learning. A lot of our students, as Bob mentioned at the beginning, different access to technology and Wi-Fi, and even where that's available on the college, for our college students, a lot of them have competing priorities at home or need to help support their families. So the idea about college feels far off. The theme of the conversations I've been seeing is we're handling what our needs are right now, and we'll think about whether or not we return to college and take summer courses or return in the fall in a few months from now. It's survival for a lot of our college students, not to, again, over-dramatize and certainly not overgeneralize, but that's the general.
Thank you so much, Claire. Bob, as you close us out, if you can also speak to one more really important question that came in via the chat, kind of the new needs that are emerging during this time that we have as uAspire, that maybe are things that we kind of do not currently have as uAspire, and what more can be done to support advisors who are doing that work every day with our students. So if you can speak to that a little bit as we close us out, that would be fabulous.
Sure. And I want to, with that question, I want to just say how appreciative and grateful I am, and we all are at uAspire, for the outpouring of support and outreach that many of you have already done and oriented in this way of reaching out and asking what our needs are. When I think about where we're at right now, we, like every other nonprofit organization, had revenue revenue plans that will be disrupted as a result of this, either events in our case, we had events in every city planned to raise funds, vital funds, to continue to support uAspire's programming. That didn't happen. Many of our donors have still stepped up and contributed regardless of those events, but there's still a significant effort ahead of us to raise the resources that we need in order to meet the demand and needs in front of us. And then, yes, there are new things that are beginning to come up and opportunities for uAspire to play a key role that will require additional resources. And we're beginning to kind of understand what those needs are, what the response to those needs are, and what they'll cost. So we're sort of in the moment of figuring that out. I'll give a couple of examples. We've decided that we'd like to begin to sort of open source some of the knowledge that we're building relative to navigating the pandemic, so that organizations that may not have the focus on affordability issues like we do have some turnkey, ready-to-use materials and resources to use with their students. So how are we making that available and those resources available to students? We're looking at trying to deploy an increased number of trainings and webinars for practitioners and opening those up to no cost to nonprofits and schools, but obviously those will come with costs to uAspire to develop and deploy across our network. So those are a couple of things that are in the works, I would say, right now, in addition to some other things that are being pulled together and developed. And I think that actually fits very nicely into part of my closing, is that we really wanted to use this opportunity to update you all on what we've been doing and what we've been up to, what our response to this has been, and what some of the learnings have been that we're culling as a result of the high volume of students that we're engaged with and have been engaged with over these last few weeks. This work is incredibly critical now, and will continue to be for the foreseeable future for quite a while, I expect. And we're incredibly grateful to those of you that have already stepped up to support our work, and for those of you that have reached out and wanted to have individualized conversations with us. You can expect that we're going to continue to want to be in dialogue with you about what our needs are and what our students' needs are over these coming weeks and months. And we hope that in partnership with so many of you that have helped to put us in the really good position that we're in to serve students during this period, that you'll also be there for us as we continue to and sustain that service to students, so that truly the reason that we exist to ensure that young people have a path to college that is affordable and a path to a college degree that's affordable, that we'll be able to continue to follow through on that. And your support up until now has been critical to get us here, and we hope that we'll be able to continue to count on you in the weeks to come as we engage in those conversations. I just want you all to know that we're incredibly grateful for the partnership that you've shown to us, and to thank you in believing in us and in the potential, more importantly, in the potential of our students, and helping them turn their dreams into a reality. Over the coming weeks, you'll see things that we'll be sharing with our network to raise resources for our work. We'll have an online auction and some other appeals, and that we hope that you will not only be able to support us in that work, but also to amplify our requests for support throughout your networks, and hope that they'll step up and support uAspire's work during this time. And with that, I will say thank you so much for joining us. We hope that this was informative and inspiring for you, and we thank you for the incredible work that you're doing to support us and to support so many students across our country. Thank you very much.